Hey, what's up everybody? It's Joe from Gadgetry Tech, and in today's video we're going to talk about the Sony MDR-M1. This is a $250 closed-back wired headphone. It's passive. It's just a standard analog headphone, and I wanted to talk about it for a few reasons. For one, this was not sent to me for review. In fact, I didn't purchase this with the intention of making a video on it. I wanted to get it because I know the older Sony MDR headphones had a pretty good reputation. I wanted my own. And I wanted to use it because I planned on making, and I still will be releasing, a closed-back headphone guide for a bunch of closed-backs under $1,000, just to kind of compare it. And I felt it would be disingenuous to say these are the best ones under X amount of dollars, or this is what I think, if I didn't include the MDR-1. Now, funny enough, I liked the MDR-M1 so much that I was like, you know what, this kind of deserves its own review. So if that's not a teaser of what's to come, that should give you a good idea. This headphone is interesting because there's some things that I like and other things that I frankly don't necessarily agree with, but it doesn't necessarily make it a bad headphone. I think the biggest thing about headphones or audio products in general is really comes down to value, unless it's like a total fail, because there are certain things you can write off as an acceptable issue or value proposition if you like another thing enough. Maybe you're a Sony loyalist and you just want one that's more comfortable than the older Sony MDR-7506, for example. So on that note, the 7506 is selling for under $100 right now. It's also a closed back, and it has a very similar design, minus the pads, which the 7506 pads are noticeably thinner and less comfortable. There's less inside ear space or volume for your ears to fit. Now, I don't have a 7506, but when I ordered this, it was supposed to arrive the same weekend I was going to CanJam SoCal 2024. Hence the shirt. That was the coincidence, but I knew this was coming, and I know that Doug, aka DMS on YouTube, has and uses the 7506 all the time. It's like his travel workhorse headphone, and he sweared by it, and he used the Yaxi pads. So I asked him if I could listen to it at CanJam, if I can measure it on my database, which we'll talk about objective measurements soon. He said absolutely. He was excited, and I was really hoping I could bring the M1 with me so he could hear it, but this didn't show up until I had already returned. Long story short, I will have some comparisons to the 7506, and just to put that in perspective, my biggest issue with the 7506 isn't the value. At $100, it's a good value. The issue for me was comfort, and that's why Doug also did the Yaxi pads. Not only did that improve the comfort, but it also altered the frequency response a little bit to give it a slightly darker, warmer sound, which will impact how I compare it to this later. As far as basic specs go, Sony uses a 40mm driver, which doesn't mean anything specific for sound quality, but I did want to mention that. It also has a 50 ohm impedance with 102 decibel sensitivity rating, so it's extremely easy to drive. You can plug this into an Xbox controller, a PlayStation controller, $10 Apple dongle, all the way up into something extreme. Now, the impedance curve, I got equipment now to measure the driver impedance from low to high frequencies, and it's relatively flat. It's pretty linear, which means it shouldn't alter the sound quality regardless of what amp you use or what your amp's output impedance is. So if you have a high output impedance tube amp, I'm sure it's going to sound fantastic, but it's not going to magically boost the bass or color the sound in any way. And conversely, you can use this on a $10 Apple dongle and still get amazing sound quality, which in fact is what I was using quite often when I was just kind of relaxing in bed listening to these. So it scales to an extent. I think, I talked about the FIO FT1 amp DAC, which is a pretty affordable amp DAC. It's a little bit more energetic sounding. It's a wonderful complement to something like this because it doesn't need a lot of power, and this is a more relaxed sound profile in the first place. So I think that's about the limit of what I would justify spending solely for this. Otherwise, start with something cheap like an Apple dongle or some low power dongle DAC, and it's still going to get very loud. As far as what's included in the box, it's pretty straightforward. You get two different cables. They are actually identical aside from length. So you get a 2.5 meter cable, which is quite long, and then a 1.2 meter cable. Now, what's interesting about this cable is it connects like a traditional way, and the ear cups are a single entry on the left cup. So all I have to do is plug that in, and now it's locked and loaded. But what's different about this, and something that is a pro and a con, is this can screw in and lock. So all I have to do is, right now it's fully seated. I can maintain a connection and reliably hold a steady seating into the headphone itself. But if you ever use an office chair or a gaming chair and it has the grappling hook style armrests, I think a few of us have been there when you turn and it yanks the cable. And if you're wearing it, it's going to do two things. Well, I guess three. Maybe it'll break the cable depending on how well made it is. it'll either rip it out of the headphone, or if it's too secure, it's like yanking your head down. So this is a locking mechanism, which can be nice for reliability's sake, as far as not wanting the cable to fall out. Some people, maybe they do this, I have no idea. But it is a different option. It's something you typically see more in the studio space, is a locking mechanism. You know, Beyerdynamic, if they're using the mini XLR connection, that one locks into place as well. So the screw-on mechanism is a pro and a con, but one thing I do like is by doing this, it gives you an optional method to secure the cable or not. So you can kind of use it to whatever you like. It also comes with the 1/4" adapter. That too screws in. It's not just quickly plug and play, so you do have to lock that in. And that part I do like, because there's a lot of times where when handling it, if you switch headphones out often, unplugging that can be a pain if the 1/4" is always falling off. So I like that that part's secured. Now, as far as build quality and comfort goes, there are different ways to look at this. This feels extremely cheap. It weighs very little, and some people perceive weight with quality, but it doesn't necessarily translate into comfort. Lightweight usually helps with comfort, so if you can get past the fact that this looks older and less expensive compared to other headphones in this price range, you will be rewarded by the lightness of it. I think as far as long-term use, that's been one of my favorite things about it. Now, as far as ear pad dimensions go, I'll remove the pad here in a second, but you have a width of just over 40 millimeters. We could round down to be safe and say 40 millimeters of width. And then if you look at the height, right about 60 millimeters. And as far as depth goes, this is a little bit more shallow. It's about 10, or when you factor in this lip right here, about 12 millimeters of depth. And on the back side, because this is angled, I'm getting just over 20 millimeters of depth. So I mentioned it's angled. Let's remove the pad, because this is a standard leatherette pad, and look at the significance of that angle. So like some other Sony headphones in the past, it does maintain that angle driver. It helps kind of maintain some of the punchiness of the bass, in my opinion, because we will talk about sound quality in a second. But just keep that in mind. If you have larger ears or they protrude out more towards the front as well, this isn't extremely deep of a pad to have that aggressive of an angle. So for comfort, for me, it was absolutely fine. There's no pad on the baffle, but my ears never touch the baffle either. I can tell that if I push on it, I'm really skirting the line as far as clearance goes. But this is a significant upgrade over the 7506 as far as pad depth goes. So if you have one of those and you just wanted it to be a little bit deeper, this is an improvement there. As far as the rest of the comfort goes, yes, it's leatherette pads, and that will run a little bit warmed if you're in a hot and humid environment. That's just a matter of personal preference. This is kind of typical in this price range, because with closebacks, you kind of need a good seal. And if you don't have a good seal, you lose a lot of the sub bass or bass extension itself, which can have a massive impact on sound quality in a negative way. So this is a very common thing. It's, to me, because it's so light and the clamp force isn't too bad, I haven't had any real issues with like leatherette heat buildup. I think your mileage may vary here, so I'm not one to tell you it's perfect or not. The FIO FT1, which I will talk about later in terms of sound quality, uses more of a hybrid pad. This is kind of like a sport fabric. It's a totally different headphone, and then you have something like the Focal Azorus, which is sport fabric all the way around. These are both excellent closebacks, wildly different price ranges, and this is in the middle. But I brought these out for not only a sound quality discussion, but also comfort in the whole daily driver aspect. I've been using these a ton, and it's for the right and wrong reasons. For one, I don't really care as much what happens to this headphone, because this is my good enough to still enjoy in terms of comfort and sound quality. But the fact that it's all plastic means that if I take it off at night, like if I'm listening to these headphones in bed, and I don't want to disturb my significant other because she's asleep, well, obviously I'm going to lean towards a closed bag. And when I set it down on my nightstand, I like that it's all plastic. I don't have to worry about destroying my nice nightstand. And again, this is a really off-the-wall type use case, but it is something to consider, and I think some people look for headphones for different reasons. This is an amazing headphone. I'm still going to say great things about it later. It has a metal screw with a metal yoke on the outside of it, and that is what rests on the ground when you put it down. That's not like a major detractor because it's built exceptionally well, and a lot of headphones do this. Here's the Focal Azorus, which also has metal on the outside. But I get super paranoid whenever I take these off and I put them down on my nightstand. And if I'm tired, I'm like slowly putting it down and trying to be careful. It's something small, but I worry a lot less with the Sony. In addition to it being so lightweight, so compact that I can wear it and the pillow can press against it. It's all these little things from a daily driver aspect that I really enjoy, but that's nothing if the sound quality isn't good. So let's talk about sound quality. Now I want to start with the objective side first to kind of take my opinion out of it, and I use a Gross style KB006X Pinaclone. And it's good for comparing against other measurements on my site, but not necessarily against someone else's, because unless they have the exact same rig and testing methodology, there's always going to be some variance there. So I want to talk about the Sony. Now, it does have a bass shelf. This is definitely noticeable when you wear it. You can see a strong lift in the sub-bass region, and this is against the Kemar diffuse field target for my Pinna. If I use a Harman curve, you can see even compared to Harman, it's going to be a little bit more emphasized beyond that neutral sound profile. When we look at the mid-range, it is relatively flat, or at least close to neutral. There is a suck out that happens at about 250 hertz. It's a little bit of a null. It's not too egregious. I actually don't mind this, because when you have that much of a bass lift, if that just casually tapered down into the mid-range, it does create kind of a boxy, thick sensation, which to me negatively impacts vocals. So this is a clean and rather narrow cut to clean up the sound quite nicely. And frankly, I think the bass still works really well for a variety of music, including the deeper bass demands of like rap, hip hop, EDM music, some jazz. There's a lot of stuff out there that digs deep. Even if you're watching movies or playing games and there's that immersive explosion, this kind of sound profile is fantastic. As far as the upper mids go and when you get into the treble, it picks up nicely, but it's not like too sharp sounding. It doesn't have a nasal sensation to it. It doesn't have any shout. I find this to be a very neutral sounding headphone in the upper, or I guess mid to upper mids and low treble. Now the low treble recess here is a little bit more relaxed than some other headphones, and I'll show you a couple others here in a moment. But when you compare it to the MDR-75L6 with the Yaxi pad, which like I said, it helps kind of warm up that sound profile and clean it up. DMS's headphone on slightly used pads measured like this, which is very comparable to the M1. In fact, some people might even like it more when you look purely on a measurement standpoint, because the recess in the pinna region isn't so aggressive at 4K. I actually like the M1 sound on my head more than the 75L6, because it's not just frequency response, the resolution and clarity is noticeably improved. So we'll get into that later, but I did want to show you pure tonality. Now, when you compare it to another favorite of mine, the FIO FT1, the FIO just has gobs of deep bass. It doesn't really roll off, and it pounds. So if you like a lot of bass and you want a little bit more warmth and heft to your sound, the FT1 is great there. The only thing I want to call out is when you look at this little peak here at like 1800 hertz, 1900 hertz, that blue spot, that is noticeable compared to the Sony, and it presents itself just slightly nasally compared to the Sony, where the Sony sounds just a tad more natural. And the FT1 also doesn't have as much of a recess in that 4K area. So some people might prefer the FT1 more. It'll sound more detailed to them, but it could also be slightly more fatiguing as well. If you listen to music at higher volumes, I find the relaxed nature of the MD1 or MDR-M1 to be a little bit more rewarding. Now I want to show you something interesting, and that is the Sennheiser 620S, because it has a very different sound profile, and I'll compare this subjectively in my closeback roundup video, but I did want to touch on this. The Sennheiser kind of cheats a couple things. Now, you would think that with this bass lift being somewhat comparable to the Sony, it would have a very similar sounding bass. This is a big reduction in the lower frequencies compared to the Sony. I can tell you the 620S sounds nowhere as deep or as bassy, and if anything, the measurements don't even fully suggest what I hear on my head. It actually sounds more bass-light and less impactful than the Sony does. Mid-range tuning is decent on the Sennheiser 620S, but it takes kind of a different approach here in that 1.5 to 2K region, creating a scoop. And this scoop is kind of designed to simulate the psychoacoustic effects of having a soundstage by pushing vocals and certain instruments further back in the mix, so it makes the sound a bit wider. In addition to the ear cups just being physically big, you can tell they wanted the 620S to be a more open sounding experience, even though it's a very closed off headphone with good noise isolation. Totally different presentation. People will like one or the other. I don't think they're directly comparable in any way. If anything, they could complement each other, but I would much rather have the Sony in this case because it has a more natural timbre characteristic, and to me that's really important when you start listening to a much wider variety of music. Now, when it comes to subjective sound quality, there's just a ton I love about this, and it's not because this does anything exceptional. On the tuning side of things, it has a strong bass emphasis, not so over the top that it's ruining everything. It's complemented well by that mud cut I showed in that upper 200 hertz region. But it's just not offensive. I find that this type of bass delivery is really nice for just a wide variety of genres. Watching movies, playing games, when the explosions happen, it sounds fantastic, and there's good bass texture and clarity to the bass as well. It's not like it's just gobs of bass. It's a different presentation. I don't think it's as hard-hitting of a bass as something like the Biodynamic DT700 Pro X, which when I listen to the song Trouble's What You're In by Fink, amazing song for testing gear with. The 700 Pro X had a much stronger percussive hit when he smacks his guitar with his hand, and you hear like that impact from his hand hitting it. That thump was more pronounced on the 700 Pro X, whereas most of the others, it didn't quite have the same impact. And conversely, the HD620S, it was almost non-existent. Totally different listening experience between both headphones. So the Sony just kind of skirts the line in the middle. It has enough of an impact and slam where I don't feel like it's missing what I think the song is supposed to be, but it's followed very nicely by sub bass and depth, which is again nice depending on the genre you listen to. Mid-range tuning is fantastic. I really have no complaints. I think the only other sub $300 headphone that's a closeback that has comparable timbre to this is the AKG K371, which I also purchased and will be talking about, but I have much more issue with the ergonomics and build quality of that headphone. I just can't wear it for a long period of time, and it doesn't like to fully seal on my ear because my ears press against the baffle a lot. So to me, even though yes, technically that could be better on a sound characteristic, what you actually hear versus how it measures is slightly different because of fitment. Those perform well on measurements because when you put it on a flat plate measurement device, they create a perfect seal. And on your head, if you don't have a perfect seal, well, bass rolls off. So as a result, the Sony M1, the FIO FT1, they seem to have more bass because of it. So if you're chasing that, even if the measurements show the 371 as being a little bit more pronounced in practice and in real life, I think the Sony has the edge there. Mid-range tuning is fantastic. Again, I have no issues with vocal presentations. I don't feel like I'm lacking or craving anything in particular. Again, because it skirts more of a safer line tune. And that recessed 4K region really helps for longer listening sessions, whether you're mastering music or just consuming it. The relaxed nature just happens to work well. And you can always EQ it up. This has very low distortion and pretty good power handling considering how easy it is to drive. So if you're concerned with that, you can always EQ up the 4K area or maybe pull bass down a little if you want to have the upper mids and low treble to be emphasized more and compared to the rest of the mix. Imaging and soundstage is great as well. It's nothing special. It doesn't stage like a 620S, but it's because it's tuned to be more natural sounding. And because of that slight mud cut, I don't find it too congested or thick feeling either. Again, it's just, what's surprising about this is when you first put it on, it's just not doing anything special. And the more you listen to it, the more you start to enjoy it. Obviously, your ears get acclimated to the sound profile, but you start switching to other headphones, and then you find different things that you may not like with other headphones that didn't initially bother you. I think that's because it's a more forgiving and relaxed sound profile. It doesn't have any glaring offensive issues like a nasal or shouty presentation. It does have pretty good resolution and clarity, so if you are chasing that on a budget, it's not exceptional, partly because, again, the relaxed tuning. But when you compare it to like the Biodynamic DT700 Pro X, I like the bass impact of that headphone, but everything sounds a little bit smoothed over. It doesn't quite let loose or reveal as much as what the M1 does. So for a comparable price, very different look and feel. I think the Sony really gets a nice job of bringing out subtle details. The FIO FT1 is exceptional in this area. That was a standout feature. It does not sound like a low-res sub $150 headphone. This is really one of its selling points. It's just a tad more energetic sounding. So if you're sensitive to any kinds of nasalness or more emphasized, 4K region treble energy, you can always EQ it, but that's really the only downside I had. Otherwise, again, that is pretty exceptional. Now, as far as gaming performance goes, you can use a mod mic on this or a standalone mic. I wouldn't really go with any other method of trying to like use wires to attach a microphone to this. In gaming, it's good for immersive gaming. If you're playing casual single player games, the M1 is awesome for that because it's so comfortable, and the sound profile is damn near perfect for casual gaming. This is easily one of my top picks in that range because it's so comfortable. FiiO FT1 being another option. The FT1 does have a slight edge in FPS gaming, not because of a driver matching thing, but because of the tuning of it, having a little bit more forward low treble energy. It happens to bring out footsteps and audio cues a little bit better, again because it's more emphasized. With EQ, the Sony is easily as competitive. So if you're okay with boosting anywhere from 2 to 4,000 hertz a little bit to kind of bring more of that up, maybe put a shelf on to cut the bass a little bit, this is a great option for gaming. I did play competitively with Call of Duty, no problem. But out of the box, the way this was tuned, I found that I didn't quite get the same emphasis and footsteps. And when you mix that with the rest of the sounds you're hearing in the game, for example, in Call of Duty, when you charge through a door, it's a loud metal door slamming open. And I found that the ratio was off, where the doors were just like a little bit too loud compared to the mix I cared about, which was the footsteps. Where when it's more linear like this, you have a closer blend of those wildly different audio cues. So to me, I could play with this at a comparable volume and still hear more. Okay, so with that being said, this was an unscripted video. I just wanted to talk about it because frankly, I've just been using it so much, and I think that says a lot. I have a huge headphone collection, and I think for a lot of people who are always collecting headphones, maybe we're always chasing those flagship products or premium things, and you don't necessarily have the daily driver, or you're still looking for that one that you can just kind of, you know, throw around with you, toss it in your bag, put it next to your bed, put it on your desk, whatever it may be. And I'm not saying that to discredit the performance of this either, by the way, because as you saw, I still think it compares really well in the closed back space, even if it looks a little bit more basic. I think if it were $200, it'd be an easy recommend and a home run at that price. It just gets a little harder when the price goes up, considering kind of what you get, see, and feel. I still absolutely love this headphone. Would I recommend it? Absolutely. I'd always warn my friends to say, hey, this is what to expect out of it. But I feel very confident in the longevity of the headphone, and I don't want to return it. This is definitely going to stay in my collection for a lot of everyday use. So with that being said, I hope you found this helpful and I answer any questions or concerns you may have had. Don't forget to shoot me a comment if you are curious to learn more about it, and like and subscribe so I could see you at the next video. With that being said, stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.